Yeah. I know some of the other guys. I know Corey's internet connection's still not good, so he wants to
What's
join.
going on with his internet connection?
I know that deal.
he
Feel that?
moved. He moved, and now he's in an Airbnb before he gets into his house, and the internet is not good there, I guess. So he's very disappointed.
Oh, that sounds bad.
Yeah, it is what it is. Hey, John, you know all about having not great internet. I mean, once you came out of it, though, I feel like you're a changed man. You know.
I you know what, you joke, but I can't even begin
Life changing.
to tell you.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, whenever you go from 1.4 or 2, maybe 3 megabits per second, bouncing microwave links off to a ski area. And then Starlink was just like the step up of like 100 megabits per second that I reacquired. And then all of a sudden the fiber drops and it's expensive, but to be able to roll out of bed, like stumble downstairs, teach a training class, and like crash on the couch during the breaks and then come back and like, and we're back, everybody. So how we doing? Yeah. God damn. You say changed man, but that's no joke. It changed my life.
I think it's funny because a lot of people are talking about 5G, right? Like, hey, 5G we're not going to need fiber anymore. And we were talking about it today, and I was like, you know how far like shortwave 5G goes? I mean, this is like the equivalent of like a slightly better Wi-Fi access point.
Yeah.
It's fast. Don't get me wrong. Like, you can get gigabit speed, but we have to build, I think the number was like, it was like 10 to 20 times as many towers as there are right now. They have to build that to really expand out the 5G coverage, like to get those speeds, right?
Well, what do they call it on your phone? It's not actual 5GE, but it's like...
Oh, yeah. Dude, they did this with 4G. They did this with 4G too, and then they were like, well, no. Now it's 4G LTE. Before it was like fake 4G where we just like changed the symbol on your phone.
Yeah, that's what we're getting.
Thanks, AT&T.
Yes. It's funny. So I live in Tampa, and they had the Super Bowl here, which is great. And we won the Super Bowl, which is also cool. But during the Super Bowl, they rolled out all kinds of 5G towers at the stadium. And I was over there recently, and I saw them. And what they do, what they look like, what's the best way to describe it? They're really short, maybe 15 feet tops. Like this isn't the tower that you see when you drive down the road. They're not tall at all. And they don't look like trees. They just kind of like this like little post out there, right? No light. I'm like, what is that? I'm like, oh shoot, that's a 5G tower. They're all over. Like, you need tons of them to make this all work. It's pretty interesting. It's a very big paradigm shift from conventional cellular, which, you have this tower, which is hundreds of feet in the air, and serving long distances. So
yeah,
we gonna need lots of towers.
I remember just going from on my cell signal, going from
like
a limited
keep going.
data connection to unlimited, and that was life changing. Just that little thing.
See, I started with unlimited, and Verizon was trying to get me out of it for years.
Yeah, and now they all went away, and now they're coming back to unlimited.
Yeah, so with the shortwave 5G, you can get unlimited internet. They don't care because they're not actually serving a huge area, right? They're just serving you on this one little thing, so they don't care. It's they're not this. The signal doesn't get messed up. So yeah, shortwave micro. They're like, oh yeah, unlimited, no problem. Getting that coverage, that's a problem. Unless you have a tower in your neighborhood, you don't have that. We have tons of articles today.
Crazy.
So much.
I'll take it.
Apple doesn't like security researchers.
Wait. Hold it. We haven't started.
Are we ready to kick this off?
Almost. I gotta get my browser window ready. I forgot to do that.
So much goodies. Do you think there'll ever be a day where we're like, hey, let's do a show today and be like, we don't have any articles, nothing happened.
Never once.
Oh my gosh. I do think it's funny that while none of this is new, it does feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like we see it more now. Is that just me, or is it maybe just more news articles about it? I don't know, I don't know.
No
Okay,
idea,
now I'm
dude.
ready.
No
now
idea.
I'm ready. Ready to rock?
Let's do
Well,
it.
we're ready.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Black Hills Information Security, talking about news, or as we like to say, it's now the official post Wild West Hacking Fest wasteland, because I am literally just joined by Ralph and Ryan. Not that that's a bad thing. Not that that's a bad thing. Like literally everyone else is just like hungover from the con last week, and they're like, there's no news happening this week at all. So just kind of wiped out, I guess. But, I'm sure next week we'll be back up to our full numbers. We also have some other co-hosts that are having internet issues. It's the week after a con. It's just
Maybe
everyone's
some
kind
people
of
took vacation.
Some people
Yeah.
take vacation, slackers. But
Yeah.
Losers.
yeah, losers. But no, I think we do have some good stories. Ralph, do you want to start us out with the first story that you want to talk about? I mean, considering half of them are Apple.
Oh my god, yeah. So I mean, we can shoot off the Apple Apple funsies. So the first one we got here is the 0 days, right? So Apple 3 0-day iOS vulnerabilities, and it's really so. Let's just describe what this is. Really, this is a critique of Apple's disclosure program and Apple's kind of like lack of wanting to be either part of it, pay out researchers, so on and so forth, or just not communicate very well. And I guess there was a couple 0 days in the gamed. It's called gamed 0 day, and disclosed a bunch of information, including Apple ID, full name associated with it, authentication tokens, a bunch of fun stuff. I guess the security researcher reached out to Apple multiple times and kind of got nothing back.
Well,
And
they weren't also happy with how much they got paid for a vulnerability. There was one
that's also
vulnerability.
true.
They said this would have been like a $50,000 vulnerability, and instead I got $5,000. So here's a whole bunch more, right?
I mean, like if there's any theme right now, it seems like Apple is not caring as much, right? I don't know. In addition, they're just not paying out as much. I don't know. Maybe they're just taking a break from security this year. There's like, you know what, security research, you guys are bugging us, right? I don't know, man.
So I think that that's part of it, but I think that put forwarding, let's say, a contrarian view, right? So for some of the companies that we've done work with, I've gotten access and seen their vulnerability disclosure database and their bug bounty program and everything, and they get thousands of people submitting all kinds of stuff like a week. So they have a lot that they're actually going through. And I hate to say, well, it's really hard, so they're not getting to it in time. But I think that that's part of it, right? I think that if you're sitting there all day and you're wading through hundreds of these things and just going through and trying to understand them, reproduce them, and looking at a lot of bug bounty submissions, their quality goes from anywhere, it's like red teamer, amazing quality, all the way down to like garbage level quality. It becomes this kind of quack, hack, and like a charlatan type thing, right? So, quack, hack, and genius. So if you're looking at this person that seems really smart, it is really hard to tell if they're a quack, if they're a hack, or if they're a genius. A quack is somebody who's just like a crazy person who maybe has some good understanding of technology. A genius is somebody who knows exactly what they're doing. And then a hack is someone who knows enough buzzwords to make themselves sound smart. It is very, very difficult to differentiate between those three if you're coming into this. And when you're dealing with bug bounty programs from people from Malaysia, from India, from Russia, from backwoods United States, it's really hard to start sorting through this and figuring out what's real and what's not. And then there's also a flood of new people that found out that they can make a living in Africa or India doing bug bounties. So what I think is you're seeing not just Apple has something that they have to work on, which they absolutely do. But what I think you're seeing is you're starting to see the seams starting to show on the entire bug bounty culture, especially as it applies to large vendors like Apple. So yes, Apple absolutely should put more money into this. Apple absolutely should hire more people to validate these things, but at the same time have a little bit of respect of the sheer magnitude of the problems that they're actually dealing with to try to do this correct.
Yeah, I think you're right with all of that, and I think we're seeing kind of the blood spilling on the street kind of scenario as opposed to just the conversations in private. And that is really, what these articles are, right? I mean, Apple's a $2.4 trillion company, right? So I don't think it's about the money. But yeah, we are seeing a lack of attention there. And yes, just people getting tired of the system and how it was set up and not getting, either getting paid or more importantly, just getting recognized or whatever it is that they're looking for. And like you said, tons of people submitting. So yeah, and that's really what these articles about. I think there's another one with the. I do think it's always funny. It's the annual lock screen bypass. That was another one of the ones up there. Every year. Yeah.
And it's like, before I even started reading that, I'm like, they used Surrey. They had to use Surrey. And it's like, there it is. They used Surrey.
Yeah, that one comes up every year. As soon as the new iOS comes out, it's kind of like, hey, who can get the first lock screen bypass, right? Maybe it's like a rite of passage for what do you call it? Vulnerability research in iOS. What I do think is the most fun, though, most people that I've seen in the past that have reported it have nothing to do with security. They just play with their phone endlessly until it does something it's not intended to do.
You're gonna have disclosures from 10-year-olds,
Yes.
They're like. But somewhere in a basement in Cupertino, one infinite loop at Cupertino, there's like a whole bunch of interns. And they're like, all right, intern, I want you all to find all the bypass vulnerabilities that you can, or you're going to get whipped. And this vulnerability comes out. The guy comes down with the whip, and all the interns are like, oh, God, not again.
And they're like, and if you tell anyone about our whipping program, you're out.
You're double whipped. And then you'll no longer work here. The other thing I love about these vulnerabilities is like it's bad news for Apple, and I'm already having friends and family that are like, "You're seeing all these vulnerabilities from Apple. I wish that they would get their poop together and be secure like Android." And it's
like, God,
there were Android vulnerabilities, and everyone's like, "Well, that's why I run Apple."
So at what is it, at the Wild West Hacking Fest, there was a whole talk about privacy and like what phone to use and so on and so forth and stuff. Great talk. And, it's not that simple. It's not. And in fact, the recommendations for like an actually like private phone, dude, no, like get ready, get your weekend cleared off. It's like, this is not
phone.
I mean, like it's Ubuntu Touch came out with a new build last week, and I'm getting ready to load it on my Pine phone. Next time we drive to Bozeman, Montana, and I have like 8 hours in the car, I'm going to be sitting there and I'm going to be loading that new Ubuntu Touch on it. I'm excited. All you have to do is have everyone do that, and we're good.
If we could just have everyone do that, we'd be perfect. And all the phone so yes, it is everyone. It's a big thing, right? We really have two players in the field, and which side you pick, make it your personal preference. But if you're expecting that one is superior in privacy or more specifically in security, then you're going to be severely disappointed, right? So.
And to pull this back to like what's actionable for our listeners, right? Because we're kind of poking fun at bug bounty programs in Apple and Android. Yeah. And if somebody's listening to the show looking for direction and free consulting, what the hell's wrong with you? What were you thinking?
Wrong show.
Honestly, the thing that at an enterprise level that you need to look at is you need to store up these news stories, regardless if it's Android or Apple, and you need to talk to management and say, what is our rapid patch deployment strategy in our organization? What is our strategy for dealing with these things as they come out? Because many vendors will actually have that capability, but a lot of organizations don't test it, they don't vet it, And we've actually worked with a handful of different companies that have tried to implement these technologies for pushing out patches or like deprovisioning and like cutting off and wiping devices. And a lot of the products that have those features, they don't work. So what I'm telling you is you need to be testing those capabilities in your environment if you have an MDM solution set up. So trying to make something useful out of this, I guess.
Yeah, I know one thing I see with like iPads when they're employed in like industrial facilities and stuff, like they'll buy the iPads that only have the Wi-Fi and then they'll put like Jamf on them or something like that. They'll be like, well, we could just factory wipe them. Yeah. But that only works if you're connected to the internet. So unless you put cellular in there, that's not going to work. And even if you do put cellular in there, it may or may not work.
Well, we had a lot of those in the various. So whenever I got out of working in skips every day, there was this huge push against any mobile devices, right? And then in a couple of the national labs, some high up muckety mucks were like, well, I want an iPad that is secure and it doesn't have cell, but it can have wireless. And we're like, you work in a skiff, like wireless bad. You know that, right? Like, and they're like, well, this is important to me because I really like it for taking notes. So then they turned on wireless. And the point is, like, just like you said, Noah, is it becomes this slippery slope where like before too long, something that's secure is now completely wide open, wild, wild west. People are using it to exfil things over Bluetooth. It's just really, really tough to keep that stuff locked down with executives.
So I have speaking of that, I have a buddy who works over at AWS, and he does a lot of the wireless stuff very specifically. Anyways, so if you don't know this, you can actually rent like this goes back to Apple too. You can rent like Macs, like iMacs, in the cloud, right? And what that really means is like there's just a big data center with a bunch of racks where they're just shoving Macs, just endless ones, right? And he went in there to be like, hey, what's the security risk here? He's like, you got to pull all these wireless cards out of there. So it's just like chucking all of these wireless cards out of this. It's just unbelievable, dude. Just like at the scale that they're dealing with that kind of hardware and pulling out wireless for security. It's wild, dude.
So, I got another story on a whole bunch of Apple computers in hey, Jeff joined. So he's not just on text.
Wow. Hey. Don't say anything when I show up, John, but Jeff joins and he gets just a whole applause.
I don't see Jeff all that much.
Yeah. It's nothing it's nothing personal.
Sure. One of my favorite like stories of Apple computers and racks is from Randy Marchini out at Virginia Tech. And he tells this story where all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people at Virginia Tech are working on supercomputing problems and clustering issues. And they come up with a way that they can cluster a whole bunch of Apple computers together back, when Apple was doing really, really good hardware for their desktop systems. And the Apple sales rep shows up to Virginia Tech, and Randy Marchini and a couple of other people get in the room, and they're like, we need to buy like X thousands of like these desktops, these Apple desktops, and we need them in a couple of weeks. Can you make that happen? Because they wanted to field a computer system to compete with like the supercomputing competition for like the world's most powerful supercomputer. So you could just see this Apple sales rep who's just like dollar signs just rolling in their eyes, right? So Apple showed up with a whole bunch of semi trucks filled with these computers and offloaded them. And I think they came in like third in the supercomputing competition. This was a number of years ago, but anytime anyone's talking about, racks full of Apple computers, I just think of that just absolute nightmarish computer supercluster of Apple computers at Virginia Tech. Yeah.
My life started off in Apple land in academia running Xgrid on a bunch of X servers. So I very much am familiar with those days. That was an interesting part of Apple at the time, really heavily in academia.
Back when you felt scared.
I wonder what the exchange rate is between dump trucks of cash and semi-trucks full of Apple computers.
I think it's a very tight correlation between those two things. It's just a line that goes up at a 45-degree angle. So, but you know what I mean? Talking about like Xgrid and Apple computers and these supercomputing clusters. I always wonder, like, if today with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, which we can do this as a transition to another story about China. If whenever they're standing up these supercomputing clusters in like Sandia and Los Alamos, they're like, well, how are we going to test it to make sure it's working the way that we want it to? It's like, there's
Got
an
to
engineer
mine.
that's like, you could mine some Bitcoin, just throwing that out there. I'll volunteer my wallet as tribute. For this.
It's a burn-in software. It's actually the official burn-in for large computing platforms, right? Supercomputers. Yeah. Yep.
So that brings us to our cryptocurrency story of the week, which we have themes, right? Cryptocurrency, and then we got ransomware. So China has officially done it, guys. They've declared that all cryptocurrency transactions are now illegal.
It's done.
Problem solved. It's now done.
It's done. This is, by the way, for like the 7th time that they've actually said this. So,
yes.
But they're serious this time. Like this is
they're this article is like, or this whole announcing is like the FUD of FUD, right? Because then the price goes down, people buy, and it comes back up because they realize that it didn't matter that China had already said they were going to do this for the 7th time. But every time China bans something, it becomes the thing you want, right? So just pick it out.
This gets into one of our continuing themes that we've talked about with like cryptocurrency, where nation states are trying to shut down like Suex, which we tried to stop that. It's ran out of Czechoslovakia and ran by Russians, and China's doing it. I'm convinced that what China is doing is they're manufacturing little mini crashes so that the people that are running China can buy on the dip, and then they can come up. But the reason why I think that this is interesting is China is basically saying this is used for illegal activity. It is now an illegal activity. And I've heard this argument from a number of people when it comes to like cryptocurrency. They're like, well, cryptocurrency is used by criminals. Kevin Mandia has said that if you're buying into cryptocurrency, you're supporting criminals. And you can say the same thing about cash. And if you look at, transactions of actual dollars, and you look at the FinCEN files from like BuzzFeed's, which they won a Pulitzer Prize for, like the banking system is literally laundering trillions of dollars in dirty money. And it has nothing to do with cryptocurrency whatsoever. So there's a lot of times I wonder, are we actually trying to solve a problem? Or, are we just picking on a technology?
You know what's funny about that too, and I'll follow that up and say that multiple major banks have gotten publicly caught doing what you're saying, like helping launder money for criminal enterprises. They were slapped with a fine. Okay, go on their way. Go on your way. Keep doing what you're doing. Okay.
Yeah. Don't do that again.
Caught. Don't do that again. Or we might fine you.
Yeah, and
but that all boils down to the fact that banks are useful to other people as well. I mean, it's like the same, because we could say that we could the easy solution on ransomware. Here, I'm going to just tell you this right now. Easy solution to stop all ransomware: we just ban the entire internet. Just shut it down. But the reason we don't do that is because the internet is useful, to the normal people, not to the nerds and enthusiasts like crypto is.
But crypto is not just for nerds and enthusiasts. If you go to a lot of countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, coins.ph for the Philippines, there's now people in some of these countries that don't have stable financial institutions that are using cryptocurrency as their financial system.
Okay, I should have actually specified. The banks and the internet are used by the people who make the rules.
Okay. Oh, cool.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're on violent agreement.
And they don't use crypto, and this is why they say we should just ban crypto.
Well, it's a threat to their current system, right?
It's a complete threat to the system. And if you look
did we lose John's audio?
We just lost his audio for a second.
He was really into it too.
Yeah, he was into it.
I think he was so into it he pulled the plug on his mic. It almost looks like.
He's really still into
it. Attackers use X, therefore we need to get rid of that thing. No matter what it is. Attackers use oxygen. Yep. Attackers use cash. Attackers use crypto. Attackers use computers. Let's ban those. You got to be careful as to what the claim actually is, and does it correlate to the proposed solution. And attackers use crypto, therefore let's ban crypto. There's probably some other reason there. Kind of comes back to the think of the children approach that gets a lot of laws at least proposed. That obviously brings a whole other can of worms into things, but I try to tread very carefully when it comes to understanding the actual rationale behind a proposal.
Oh, I can't wait until kids are using crypto. And people are like, we need to ban crypto because of the kids.
Think of the children.
No, they're going to say something like that. They're going to be like, they're using microtransactions in games, but now they're using crypto. It made it too easy now. We need to get rid of crypto. It's the crypto.
Back in my day, when we bought drugs, we bought it with cash. I don't know. So okay, somebody was saying something before I interrupted them with, King of the Hill stuff. So,
gosh.
But this ties
I
into
guess it seems like what they're trying to accomplish is kind of more or less the semi-universal ban that we have on like torrents now. Yeah. I mean, torrents got used by a lot of bad people and it wasn't used by enough good people. So therefore, even though it wasn't a bad technology, now your ISP can basically send you a letter anytime you use one.
But let's also back up. That didn't solve the problem though, right?
Right.
What ultimately solved the problem was Netflix and the ability to buy media very quickly, efficiently, and easily and legally online, right?
Right.
So if you're like, well, I can buy this game for $250, or I can try to pirate it, I'm just going to buy the game for $250, right? Or if I'm trying to watch a movie, I can go to Amazon and like push play. It just makes it very, very, very easy.
Oh yeah.
To do. So
I think like kind of what they're trying to do with crypto in that case is they're trying to push it to kind of that same fringe area. But
yeah, well, but I don't think that's going to work as well in this situation.
Oh no,
right? I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
The amount of money that China spends on the power of consumption alone is, I just put an article in the private chat here. I mean, at 67%, do you think that might have an influence on maybe the why? Just how much cash they're throwing at the problem?
Well, and they're probably subsidizing it too. And they're like, hey, there goes all of that power.
And they have cheap, very dirty power available. And kind of first dibs on a bunch of GPUs. There's a bunch of miners that are buying pre-built laptops and such, buying them at retail, and it's still better than trying to go on the scalpers market for GPUs. So I don't think they're going to change the economics of this. So it turns out when you ban something, when you make it illegal, it doesn't magically all stop. I doubt this is going to make a huge difference in how much crypto is mined inside of China.
Yeah, I doubt it. Well, but a lot of those miners are actually in power stations and they're sanctioned by the people that run those specific areas of China, right? So as long as the people in power are making money, they're cool with it. And wait, that's just like everywhere. All right. So I want to move on. I want to talk a little bit about the FBI and ransomware, and I'd love to get your take on this. But for 3 weeks, the FBI actually sat on a key that would have decrypted ransomware on about 1,500 networks. And I think that this is one of those things you can go either way. There's people that are like, they absolutely should have released that immediately. And then there's the other side. It's like, means and methods. If you release this information, then the people
how did you get it?
Yeah. How did you get it? And it gets them to start changing their operations and their TTPs. And you really like staying inside of that, that TTP envelope of your adversary. So I don't know. I could go either way on this one. What do you guys take on this one? Should the FBI release this stuff immediately, or is it better for the interest of everyone for them to sit on it?
I mean, this goes right towards just being able to attribute, this is like pretty much Tradecraft 101 for, however your where your intel's coming from. So, and that's really what they were protecting, right? Whether it's SIGINT, HUMINT, however they got it, they don't want to disclose it. And that's why they were sitting on it, not because they didn't want to help these people out. So, and this happens all the time. A lot of information the government knows or has, or intel that they received, it never becomes like shared or public, but they can use that to make other actions and decisions, but they don't necessarily share that information because they're going to share how they got it. So not uncommon.
Matt Toussaint did a great rant on this not too long ago in the private sector, we are extremely quick to burn our intelligence sources, like kind of by instinct. Whereas in more military world, it is very common to actually think very carefully about what you were revealing to attackers when you reveal, the methods that you gained that information. Just the fact that you reveal in the timing tells the attackers a good, very strong hint as to how you got it. So you can't just have a key come out of nowhere. You are going to reveal something to attackers.
Yeah. The other thing is, even if they did reveal the key, like the FBI, I think, is completely, it's impossible for them in any government agency just to like quietly post the key somewhere or give the key to somebody else. You know, they've got to have a freaking press conference. They've got to have a PowerPoint presentation. They got to give it an operation name. Like, you know, here we are. We're going to be telling you the inside workings of Operation Screeching Condor, which I was the lead agent on Operation Screeching Condor. It just can't be like, it can't be like, hey, Mandy, here's the key in an envelope. Just
make it happen.
Do with it what you will, right? Like, they can't do that. That's just not how they work as an agency.
Well, that doesn't renew budgets at the end of the year.
Yeah, it doesn't renew.
But I mean, what's their job though, right? Isn't it to, find out who did this? And I think that's really kind of, is it their job to like just go around finding decryption keys for attacks? I think it's their job. I mean, this is just my opinion, and to find out who did it. And that process sometimes is like long and it isn't smooth and requires you to put a lot of pieces together. It also requires for someone to make mistakes. And for that to happen, you have to kind of, keep quiet about it also.
Yeah.
Well, and it comes to like short-term gains versus like long-term destruction. I mean, if they thought that by keeping that information private that they'd compromise those networks, could lead to shutdown or something like that. I mean, it really boils down to the fact that they either release it now and they save a few people over here, or they try, if they think they can, to shut down the entire operation, which could save an unknown number of people over here. And that's, I think, what was going on. And I think that's a good idea.
I think information sharing is still very hard. I mean, John, you've got a great class with introduction to MITRE, but even with the whole CISA links that get posted frequently, there's a lot of people that don't understand how to ingest those TTPs and then take action to do something with it. So even if they release information at a more structured cadence, will that really help?
Well, that's also assuming that the entire enterprise is set up to where the potentially petabytes of data, depending on the size of the organization, are even accessible to the analysts on an instantaneous basis. Or if it's an alert that's probably a false positive, not really worth the 30 to 45 minutes of digging into it when you've got all of these other alerts that are higher priority.
See, and I think that's a good point, is like that quality filtering whenever these things start coming in, right? And this gets kind of on a different kind of tangent, but I think it's important. Whenever we're talking about intel, right? Whether you're talking about the FBI, or you're talking about a key and how you actually use that, or you're doing threat intelligence and you receive that data and what you actually do with it, I think that point is absolutely solid. And that's why I think it's important that we start getting into more adversarial emulation and, basically, what can we emulate to make sure that our alerts are actually working the way that they're intended? But no, it's hard. Like, intelligence is hard. It doesn't matter where you're at. You can spend years digging on something that will never come to fruition in the IC community. And then you can completely miss something that was blatantly obvious and right there in front of your nose. So no, it's tough. It's really tough. Always is.
It's also really expensive. I think we spend a lot of money doing it. Like too. A lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think, okay, let's have some fun with this. What are some ways they could have released this in such a way they would have had fun? Like, I'll give you some examples. This gets into PSYOPs. So you have this key, right? Let's say you were able to hack into a computer. You were able to get access to the key to decrypt all of these different things. There are some different ways that you can do that, right? Like, you could, from that computer that you have access to, just have that user account email it to you with an email that says, I really want to help the FBI, and I'm really looking forward to actually working with the FBI in the future. You could release that. You could say that you received it from the leader of this particular group, and he was talking about how he wants to cash out and leave everyone else in the group behind. And the point is, with PSYOPs, if you can release it in such a way that creates this discontent within the criminal organization itself, you get these amazing and fun fireworks after you do that.
Oh
too.
yeah. Yeah,
So,
you got to make a disgruntled employee type scenario,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
He was very upset with the group. They weren't compensating him right, and he released it, and that's how it got out there. And
like, I'm not happy with the amount of money that they paid me, and I expected this should have been a $50,000 ransomware gig that I did. They only paid me in $5,000. So here's an unlock bypass for Apple's phones. No, so that's different types of disgruntled.
This very much makes me think of the AACS key, the 09F9, right? And how many people wanted to publish that key in so many different ways. I'm thinking of like the poems and songs that people made so that there'd be their own copyright of that version. People do the flag.
You can make shirts and sell them online, right? There's so many other ways that you could have done this, right? And I know people are talking about AAS and all that, but all right. So that's the ransomware thing. I want to talk about the Nagios software bugs. So this is in the Hacker News, and I actually was a co-author in one of the worst technical books that was ever published. It was Nagios Enterprise Monitoring. I think I wrote 2 chapters in it, and it was bad. Like, we had whole pages of the book that were all code for Nagios plugins, and there was no website where people could download it. So you'd have to literally sit there and type the Well, it's fun, right?
Were you trolling them?
There's a lot of organizations that are still using Nagios. And if you can scroll down to the bottom to the scores, keep going. These are no joke, right? Like, these are like, wow. Okay. So with this, like, we have an 8.8 score, 9.8.
There's actually 3 9.8s. It
There's
looks like
3 9.8s, and just so you know,
it's
bad.
SQLI.
Like, the closer you get to 10, bad. Like, SQL injection is one of them.
That's like 101 for web development. Just finding SQLI. Anyways.
Well, yeah, and then that 9.8 effectively means that, like, with just that attack, you can do something really terrible. Like, you don't need to string a series of attacks together. It's just that 9.8 can get you something really terrible, and you have 3 of them in the list.
Yeah, I hate CVSS scoring systems, but on a scale of 1 to bad, right, 10 being bad, it's pretty clear. And we joke about scoring, but as an attacker, as a pen tester, there's usually like 2 classifications of vulnerabilities you actually care about. Things that get you a shell and things that don't. And 4 of these are very clearly things that get you a shell. And therefore things worth worrying about. Code is attack surface, and Nagios is no different.
Obviously, in this disclosure, somebody got paid, most likely, to do a review of this software, right?
This is reviewed by Clarity Security, and they did wait and make sure that Nagios was patched before they released them. So they were paid to do this. So
I just don't. I was just gonna say, I just don't think this is like a vulnerability like disclosure program. That's all I was trying to say, right? Like, and I think if you take any of these products, right, and you run them through the ringer, like, this should be the result most of the time, but not like this. Like, the 5th round should start getting better, where you're like, okay, we really didn't find as much, right? But yeah, there's a lot in here. So,
well, and Skylight, if you remember, Skylight earlier this year, I can't remember when. I remember it being cold, but they released a whole bunch of vulnerabilities in Nagios as well. So I don't know if Nagios is actually hiring these firms to do this, which maybe that's a good play. Maybe they're hiring firms to look at their software and they're releasing these patches and these updates. I hope that's what's going on in this situation.
I agree with you, John, but I will say this, right? SolarWinds, much bigger, probably more paid, and they had just as bad as stuff in it. So I don't know, man. We're all screwed. I can't give you a good light.
I think if you want to take away from it, it's that there will always be some initial access mechanism. You'll never be 1 day away from a breach. This is why we focus on post-exploit attacker actions and detective pipelines, and not just let's prevent all the things and then never monitor ever again.
Oh God, earlier this year we had a customer where we did an external and an internal, and like all of the internal vulnerabilities, they had a whole bunch of highs and criticals, And they basically were like, well, none of these are highs and criticals. And we're like, wait, what? Like, you're using default passwords. You have things that are unpatched. You have those amazing Server 2003 boxes that Ralph was talking about earlier in the show. How is this not critical? And they're like, well, we had to give you access to the inside of the environment. It's behind a firewall, so they're all lows. Like, it's not how any of this works here, like, at all.
Yeah, that happens all the time. Not necessarily the denying of the vulnerability severity level or whatever, but you'll get on. You'll see a perimeter and it'll seem buttoned up, and there's not really much there. You get access to the internal, and it's like just a shooting gallery, like the Wild West out there, right? It's just, guns blazing. I'm like, you're one bad payload, one bad attack away from just total destruction, right? So it really is something you have to consider. Just having good external security is not going to fix that internal problem.
So speaking of internal problems, trying to get through this because we got really, really wrapped around the axle in crypto.
Happens.
So this is one of those things I know Jeff is going to love. Jeff, whenever we're teaching, we like talking about real mode versus protected mode startup on Windows systems. And whenever so let me explain the difference. So whenever an operating system starts in real mode, you can access any part of the memory of that operating system. So if you go back to Windows 95, you could have a program that could hook into another program and change its memory contents. And with Windows XP, I believe SP2, they actually implemented protected mode memory across the entire operating system. And the reason why this matters today is you can actually install and create rootkits that whenever the operating system starts, it goes through real mode memory for a brief period of time, and then it transitions into protected mode. And when that operating system runs in that real mode memory, where you can access all the different areas in memory, a bunch of boot kits have the ability to actually reach in and disable things like mandatory driver signing and things of that nature, so that the malware can continue to load and can continue to run. So one of the things I think is really cool is we have this story. A new bug in Microsoft Windows could let hackers easily install a rootkit, which is funny because Microsoft already released the application compatibility toolkit. That's a whole nother story. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But this is actually a weakness in Microsoft Windows platform binary table, which, Jeff, I don't know about you, but I got kind of a little bit excited because I didn't even know what the hell that was.
A whole other world. Fantastic point of attack surface. Yep, absolutely.
It is. And specifically what this does is what this particular table does is it allows the boot firmware to provide Windows with a platform binary in the operating systems as far as what can execute. So what happens is it allows you to have your motherboard manufacturer point to sign binaries for that BIOS or that firmware UEFI. So it allows it to execute. So what happens is you can actually hijack this table so that your rootkit is actually running at the same level as like a ROM for UEFI, and allows you to run untrusted binaries to allow them to execute. So this is
what's hilarious is I wasn't actually pre-reading the links, and I was furiously Googling because I'm like, I'm pretty sure there's a way in UEFI to have a binary that Windows executes, like that the OEMs can provide, and it turns out it is WPBT. I did just share in the private chat the drop WPBT on GitHub, which is one way to remove those. You could also use it to audit inside your environment. But yeah, anytime there's a built-in non-Windows persistence mechanism that goes back and affects Windows, that's huge. It means you don't have to have like custom BIOS that you flash. It means you use the feature instead of using a bug or writing your own BIOS extensions or UEFI.
And it used to be, back before like bad BIOS, the idea was if you could actually completely overwrite the BIOS with your own malware. And I can't remember who's the instructor out in Europe. It's not, maybe it is Raul. But he basically was creating rootkits that would run inside the firmware of network cards. And I feel bad because I can't remember his name. It's a total brain fart. But this is interesting because, like you said, it's not like you're completely changing out the firmware. You're basically just hijacking parts of the firmware. And that's all that you need to do to allow it to get it to execute and run properly.
Was that Dragos Rui 2013 or so? That was
Dragos. Dragos is the one he was talking about bad BIOS, where it was basically communicating over the speakers and microphones for air gap networks. So that was his. This actually goes a little bit earlier, but even if you go back, Litchfield, David Litchfield's brother, actually had a paper that he released called Creating and Detecting PCI-based rootkits. So there's a long, like really colorful, we can go back to Joanna Ratatska as well and some of her research. There's just this amazing background of just really rich rootkit stuff that's just so cool, going all the way back to Hogland and Butler and all of those different tools. So I don't know. How do you go about dealing with something like that? Now, this is what I wanted to open up to everybody. If you're a corporation, how the hell do you actually go about at a systematic enterprise level dealing with rootkit detection and response?
Improving DevSecOps and getting things into a more auditable structure. Like infrastructure as code for all things, devices included.
I was going to say device baselining too, to try to, like, you should know what is executing on your system at any time. But the problem is device baselining is a nightmare, and especially at scale. There's just so many caveats there as far as detection goes. I mean, so like if you did a device baseline on your system, you said these are the only software packages that are allowed on here. It's easy to find that something executed that's outside of that, but doing that at scale can be super complex and kind of a hurdle.
And this gets into some detection difficulties, right? Like a lot of these tools, one of the things that people used to say is you could basically flash your firmware, flash your BIOS, and it would overwrite the bad one. Problem with that is a lot of these different rootkit technologies, they'll see the version that you're trying to flash, and they'll just update their version to match the version that you're trying to install. Go back to some other rootkit techniques. Jamie Butler released one called Shadow Walker back in 2008. And it basically paged itself out of memory and waited for any memory reads to go by for memory forensics and then brought itself back. And it's funny because you talk to people and they're like, well, no one's ever detected these types of rootkits in the wild. And that doesn't sit well with me, right? Like, have we not detected these things in the wild because they're not heavily used? Or have we not detected these things in the wild because nation state level attackers that are actually using them it's that advanced that it's very difficult to detect. CZ Adanki, I mispronounced that, I apologize, talked about Windows 11 and Trusted Platform Module 2, and that gets into basically trying to trust the actual software that's running on your firmware, on your computer system, like your processor, memory management unit, things like that. But this particular attack is one of those types of things that has a very, very good possibility of bypassing that type of control that's put down on it. So
don't get me wrong, TPM and trusted boot chain are great things, 100%. They're not a 100% panacea, and using the OEM way of launching a binary within Windows for OEM compatibility purposes, that's intended behavior. That's not going to be blocked by secure boot, for example.
Yeah.
So is the actual like exploit code and persistence mechanism stored inside of like the Windows bootloader, or is it stored inside of the firmware on the chips?
Two different things, right? Actually, three. One, you're talking about the exploit. This is not talking about an exploit per se. This is a persistence mechanism. So you have to get on the box, get administrative level rights, and then it allows you to actually write this so it is in the firmware. So it is something that is going to be loaded every single time. Jeff, you were going to say something too.
Two things. One, I shared a link to ChipSec, which is the closest thing I know of to a fairly reasonable way to audit your, essentially your UEFI, your BIOS throughout the organization. It's cross-platform support. I think it's from Intel, if I recall. But it's a pretty good resource. Obviously, there's attack surface everywhere. Anywhere there's code, there's attack surface that includes persistence mechanisms. If you want to get started there, first, I mean, hardware and software inventory is way, way, way above examining UEFI for persistence mechanisms. But there are ways to examine this at a defense point of view as well.
Well, and this gets into the rabbit hole, right? Like, Jeff's talking about it, you shouldn't be worrying about this. I know that sounds weird. There's so many other things that you should be worrying about, like password policy, two-factor authentication, all of these standard motherhood and apple pie things. And what sucks is there's always this curve where someone's learning computer security and they start to think it's like, well, we can get on top of this and we can detect these attacks and we can deal with these things. And then you start learning about like ring -13 and you're like, what the hell? Is it turtles all the way down? And then there's some guy with a beard that's like, yep, turtles the whole way down. It's like,
to add some right problems.
To add something practical to that, though, I would say you should develop the habit, the skill as an InfoSec professional of every time your pointy-haired boss says, I'm worried about UEFI persistence, you say, great point. And awesome. I'm going to use that concern to increase actual security benefit. You know what? We don't know which boxes we actually have throughout our environment. So we're going to work on UEFI persistent searching. But as a prerequisite to that, we need some really good hardware inventory out there. So that's going to be incorporated into the project. And it's a prerequisite. So obviously, we got to start there. Like, always have this pivoting mechanism built in for when someone brings up, here's a compliance concern, or here's something I saw on some headline. Yes, and we need to apply that going back to the basics.
So Jeff's talking about InfoSec gaslighting. Yes. We need to fix this. Great point. Absolutely. Solid point. But I think we got to get our arms around the problem first before we start jumping in and trying to solve it.
That makes you management material.
If I may ask, and I mean, I'm relatively new, I guess you can say. So just feel free to laugh at me or tease me about it, whatever. But when I was researching boot hole, and looking for ways to kind of prevent that from happening, not necessarily be able to detect it, but prevent it, effectively, couldn't you just set a BIOS administrator password and kind of lock yourself out of that? Even as an administrator, I wasn't able to directly modify BIOS settings without the administrative passwords.
So understand that there's more than just the BIOS on your CPU, right?
Right.
On your motherboard, right? So whenever you're looking at the attack surface, your video card has its own like CPU and GPUs and its own firmware. Network card does too. There's a ton of different things that exist in your computer system that become really, really good places where you can actually inject your malware in that firmware, and then it makes it persistent across reboot, and it makes it persistent against like operating system installs. So You're right on the BIOS side, but it turns out that actual BIOS level malware is incredibly rare, but you see a lot more malware in firmware instead.
Okay, so I think I get it now. So WPBT actually is looking at all of those different firmwares, not just your BIOS firmware.
I believe so. I believe it's actually checking to make sure that all that software is digitally signed by the proper vendors. Jeff, is that correct? I don't think it's just BIOS.
I think as we move to UEFI, the attack surface got more complicated, as things tend to do over time. You're right in BIOS protecting like BIOS access, but the problem is UEFI is also a file system of essentially executables. I mean, literally Windows PE executables. And it's writable once you're admin inside of Windows. And sure, there are signatures to protect, but it turns out bypassing signature protection varies greatly in difficulty based on the environment. Like kernel drivers for Windows, for example, effectively can't be revoked from a signature perspective. So you see malicious reuse of existing vulnerable drivers used by attackers all the time. And I believe this WPBT is taking advantage of a continuation of that style of attack.
Well, and the thing that I find hilarious about this, if you're looking at Intel, Trusted Platform Module, you talk about UEFI and all of this, you almost have this theme where it's like, holy crap, organizations are getting compromised constantly through spear phishing attacks. And Microsoft's like, well, here's UEFI. Okay, that's odd. Still, 95% of the attacks are spear phishing and password sprays and all these things. And Intel's like, here's Trusted Platform Module. Okay. Here we have this. Here's Trusted Platform Module 2. It's like, okay, you get a bunch of really, really, really smart, techie, geeky, like Silicon people who spend a lot of time at places like Usenix. And then they look at the computer security problem as like, you know what this needs? This needs some crypto. Crap, that didn't work. You know what this needs is some crypto that's baked into the silicon. That's going to fix the problem. And it's like, no, your core issue is somebody's going to click on a link from a stranger.
I do think one last thing about this is that this whole rootkit idea and at the BIOS level and all this other stuff, these are pretty advanced. And there's this like 10 stages down the line. Like, and a lot of times when I'm doing a red team or even thinking, we don't even go this far because we didn't need to. And second of all, I don't want to have to explain to the customer how to remove this thing, right? Because it could be a whole process. And like, it could be, you know, and they're like, you still have access. We've been trying to get rid of it for 3 months. We're like, you just need to do this. They're like, we had to wipe the whole, we burnt the computer, you know? But still though, it's just this attack, like you said, John, a ton of other issues, right, before you get to this, right? So maybe let's think about those first, even though this is important and we should talk about it. But, you know, this isn't what I would lose sleep over. Let's just put it that way, right?
So if you want a frame of reference, like if you're going to start chasing the turtles all the way down, I want you to know that outside of Sandia National Laboratory, if you're in Albuquerque, you can actually see this line where there's this big barbed wire fence that's going around a secure area. If you get in a car or a Jeep and you ride out in the middle of that area, which, by the way, you can't unless you have somebody escorting you and you have a badge. They have like a tent and they have buildings. And in these tents and in these buildings, they have a whole bunch of decommissioned hardware that at some point they believe has been compromised or it's been retired or whatever reasons. They aren't using these computers anymore. For the United States government, for highly classified computer systems, if they believe that that system has been compromised, the only solution that's available to them is to completely decommission the entire platform. So there's literally millions of dollars of computing equipment that's just sitting out in the desert collecting sand because there's nothing in that platform that they trust, because they know once it gets compromised, if you actually have a situation where a nation state attacker got on that platform, it is now officially evil turtles all the way down. So maybe that'll help you sleep better at night.
Yeah. My wife and I are watching the Alien series and Nuke It from Orbit. It's the only way to be sure. Really, like, for top tier secrets, sure. DBAN probably works fine, but in all honesty, top tier secrets, they deban and do the trim control and then physically grind the hard drive if it's spinning disk and then keep the ground up remains, possibly melting them.
Put it on a burn.
What's available.
I like that how you deband it first and then ground it.
They literally store. My friend. They store those hard drives the same place they store the spent fuel rods. Literally, we can't get rid of it. This is that serious. Like no one can even see the shards.
Hey, quick question before we move off of this topic. Do you think this might be associated with like maybe some of the hyperconvergence stuff that's going on? Like I know ESX had some issues earlier in the year with Hello Kitty. Could this be associated with maybe some stuff going on with like vSphere to try to get at the hyperconvergence level to then do things on boxes, or maybe not?
Well, then you're kind of touching on like you're kind of like touching on like Spectre, Meltdown, all those types of attacks.
You're going all Matrix on us.
So
okay, I'll digress.
The point is, like I said, there's absolutely mathy geeky people that are running huge data centers, and they do care about this, like at a very, very deep level. And I think that there's an XKCD comic out there that they talk about, you know, cloud computing and everything, and then they basically boil it down to one simple thing: that, you know, cloud computing is nice because you know that there's engineers from Microsoft and Amazon that are basically losing sleep over these types of issues. So leave it for the realm of the dragons, I suppose.
Oh my gosh, so much fun.
All right, with that, let's take it out. That's a great point to end it, because I know there's new people listening to this and they're like, are we all screwed? Yes. Yes, we are. And with that, we'll see you next week, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.